Welcome to the Spectrum of Sonship. From acorn to oak, from infant to mature son, this series is all about the Father's process of maturing his sons. And together, we'll explore each stage of growth and the Father's work to bring his sons unto full stature. This really is the slow fire process of discipleship. In the last episode, we started to talk about the breaking, the stage every son must walk through if he's going to live by the life of Christ. And the Father's hand goes right to the core of our independence. He starts to pull down everything we've built in our own strength, even the things that once looked spiritual or successful. Because the breaking brings about the removal of everything that makes us think we are better. It's about removing everything that was built apart from Him. It's the loss of what we built in our own wisdom, the loss of everything sourced in self. Because only then the life of the Spirit can be released from within. And at first we think He's shaping us and forming us for greater impact. But the more we walk with Him, the clearer it becomes. He is not developing the self-life, He is bringing it to an end. And we truly begin to see that our self-life only needs one thing, and that's a death blow. Every attempt to keep it alive eventually collapses under the dealings of His hand. And the Father never intended for the self to be improved, for He intends it to die. And the Son cannot be fully expressed while the self still rules. Until the old life is brought to nothing, the Spirit remains imprisoned, buried under layers of reasoning, emotion, and independence. But before we talk about the failure of self, we need to see what the Father is truly confronting. He is exposing every pattern of flesh we have built, both good and evil, formed to meet our own needs through our own strength, with our own resources apart from His life. And the good flesh carries the same nature as the bad because both still draw from the same source of independence, from that same tree of independence. The self that continues to live separate from Him. And when the Father begins to truly deal with us as sons, He doesn't just touch the obvious wrongs. He puts His hand on what we've always thought was good. Both good and evil came from the same tree. In The Messenger of the Cross, Watchman Nee points out that when Adam ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, he didn't just take in rebellion, he took in independence. And from that moment, man became the judge of right and wrong, wise and foolish, strong and weak. But all of it came from the same poisoned source, self-deciding independence apart from Him. And good flesh is harder to recognize than bad flesh. The bad really stands out. We can see it clearly, but the good looks holy, kind, generous, and useful, so we protect it. Yet it's still flesh, it's still from Adam. It can never produce the life of the Spirit. And Watchman Nee wrote that even the good nature and the splendid managing powers of man not born again are still flesh, because that which is born of the flesh is flesh. And so the Father goes after both sides of the tree. He doesn't just expose sin that looks dark. He confronts the bright, confident side of self that still tries to live independent from Him. And this is the true depth of the breaking. The cross doesn't just draw a line between right and wrong. It divides what is of the spirit and what is of the soul. It cuts through every noble motive that was never born of His life, everything we've ever built in our own power. Even the things that carry His name must fall and collapse. And until this happens, we keep producing fruit that looks alive, but still carries death with it. And so this is why the Father must bring us here to expose what independence has produced and bring it to an end. And what comes next is the unavoidable stage every son must face, the complete collapse of self. This is the necessary failure of self. When the Father begins to break the self-life, everything that once seemed strong starts to fall apart. What used to bring results now falls completely flat. The words, the prayers, the same drive and energy that once seemed to work, it all begins to lose power. You can feel it slipping through your hands, and no matter how hard you try, you cannot make it come alive again. And this is the Father's doing. He is taking down everything that was born from your own resource so that what is born of his spirit can finally stand and bring life. And this is the necessary failure of self. It's not a single moment of crisis, but a slow, deliberate dismantling of confidence in our own strength. And the Father allows the very things that once carried weight to lose their influence until we see them for what they really were, the product of soul, not of spirit. Every method that once made us feel effective begins to break down, and the strength that once defined us now exposes us. And in this stage, we begin to see that self can never heal self. It can never fix self. The outer man cannot deal with the outer man. Only the cross can do that. And the Father allows these moments so that when we reach the end of ourselves, of our own resources, where everything we relied on starts to fail, he is revealing that it has never and can never carry his life. The systems we built, the habits that kept us comfortable, the strengths that once defined us all begin to crumble. And as they do, we finally see how deep our dependence on self really was. What we thought we were losing was never truly life to begin with. And the Father lets self fail so that the Son can finally live freely through us. And the deeper issue behind this failure is our independence. It was never only about effort or performance. The real problem is the soul that insists on being the source. The self still wants to decide, to lead, and manage life on its own terms, and this is what the Father is confronting. Watchman Nee wrote that the light of God pulls off the mask of self, which covers up who you are and what you do. And when this light shines, we begin to see how much of our serving, building, and planning came from ourselves. Even the most spiritual actions have often been born of independence, energy, and wisdom that never came from Holy Spirit. And every time we move without his initiation, we act as if we are the ones who have initiated and we are the source. We might call it discipline or leadership, but he calls it flesh. And the law of the spirit of life cannot flow where the self still rules. The Father will therefore lead his sons into situations that expose their limits. He allows pressure to rise until the self reaches its end. And what feels like defeat is actually deliverance. Watchman Nee wrote in The Normal Christian Life, and I quote, "To live in the flesh is to do something out from myself. It is to derive strength from that old natural source of life that I inherited from Adam." And so the Father must therefore bring us to a place where even our best abilities are shown for what they are, powerless to produce life. Our confidence in self is the greatest barrier to the flow of Holy Spirit. And when the self finally fails, the ground is cleared for Holy Spirit to truly govern. The breaking removes the throne of the soul so that the Spirit, the new man joined in oneness to the Lord, can take his rightful place. And only then do we begin to live from divine supply rather than human resources. Independence ends and dependence on him for everything truly begins. And from here, the Father begins to expose deeper things. He begins to touch the vows and promises that were made in the soul, the very things that keep us tied to independence. And so what comes next is the exposure of the inner promises we made out of the soul, the vows formed in moments of pain and pride, forged to protect ourselves, which have kept us tied to our independence. And this is the unveiling of vows made in the flesh. When the Father begins to uncover the vows of the soul, it becomes deeply personal. He brings to light the very moments we made them, moments of pain, humiliation, fear, or even rejection, where we said deep within ourselves, never again. And these were the early declarations of independence that shaped how we lived. We built walls of self-protection and called them wisdom. We took control of our pain and called it strength. But these vows have kept us bound, unable to live from the freedom of his life. When we were young, wounded, or abandoned, We made inner promises to survive. We said things like, no one will ever hurt me like that again. No one will ever humiliate me like that again. I will never be weak like that again. I will prove myself. And these vows became the framework of our independence. They gave us a false sense of control. They became the voice of self, the sound of independence that demons recognize and rally around because it resists the life of the Son. And the Father allows pressures and conflicts to reveal these vows. When new frustrations touch old wounds, the strength of these vows rises up. We feel anger, defensiveness, or withdrawal, and we think we are protecting ourselves. But what is actually happening is that vow is protecting self. It speaks loudly in our thoughts and reactions. You'll not be hurt again. You will not be made small again. But the Father is exposing this sound so that he can break it. And when the power of the cross meets these vows, something does begin to break inside. When the sound of independence is shattered, another sound rises, the sound of agreement with the Father. Because out of the breaking comes a new cry that says, yes, Father. The sound that changes everything, because it's the sound of sons living in oneness with him. Breaking the vows is not about revisiting the past for the sake of pain, but recognizing where independence was born and letting the cross truly deal with it. The Son never made vows, lived in complete dependence upon the Father. His life was not driven by self-protection, but by oneness. That same life now lives in us. And so when the Father exposes a vow, it's an invitation to walk in the freedom of a son. The vows of the flesh lose power when we agree with him. The moment when we say, yes, Father, the grip of independence is broken and we step into the true rest and freedom of a son truly dependent on the Father for everything. I spent years moving from place to place, looking for someone or something that could ease the pain of childhood stuff. None of it ever touched the core because beneath it all were the vows I had made and held on to, silent promises that kept me in charge of my own supposed healing. My deepest controversy was never with people, but with the Father himself, because I blamed him for what he allowed to happen. And so he is not dealing in surface repair. He brings every wound, every memory and coping mechanism to the cross, because there is only one thing the Father must do with it all, and that is kill it. And so once these vows of self are exposed and broken, what remains is a life no longer driven by protection or control, but governed by trust in him. The cross now moves deeper, not only to expose independence, but to bring the full work of deliverance, because this is the work of the cross. And so the flesh always tries to guard and protect, convincing us that it can keep us safe, yet it only strengthens independence. Because the Holy Spirit desires to do everything for the new man, to shield, to comfort, to guide, to teach, to lead and govern from within. Then every time we give our yes to him, we deny the flesh its place. And this is what it truly means to walk in the Spirit. The cross silences the voice of the flesh and allows Holy Spirit to lead, bringing us into the freedom of living by his life alone. And when the Father takes us beyond the exposure of vows, he begins to show us the depth of his purpose. The cross is not about pain management or outward change. It is his final word upon everything born of Adam. The cross addresses the source, the origin of all that we have lived from. Everything that came from the life of self must die so that everything born of Christ can live. It's not a repair, it's a replacement. Here the line is drawn between what belongs to the old man and what belongs to the new, and the cross reaches into every area of life. It cuts through every layer of independence, touching the places where we still hold control, claim ownership, or defend our rights. The Father's hand moves with purpose to destroy everything that was never of him in the first place. And what appears to us as loss becomes our deliverance, because nothing that does not come from him can carry his life. And as he works, the cross begins to touch everything. It searches through relationships, ministry, ambition, and even our sense of calling, asking, so who built this? Anything founded in our own strength or wisdom will eventually be dismantled. The Father refuses to let his sons live from any other source. So to live by the cross is to destroy what was never meant to survive and to embrace the life of the Son within. The cross is the beginning of true purpose, life that flows entirely from Holy Spirit within. The breaking of independence leads to a brand new education, learning to live from the life of another, learning their way of life. And this work of the cross is an ongoing work. And it's by this deep inwrought working of the cross that the Father continues to train us to live by the source of his life instead of independent knowledge. The tree of knowledge keeps us trapped in comparison and self-evaluation, always measuring, judging, and reasoning according to what we see. Whereas the tree of life draws us into dependence, trusting his life within to lead. Knowledge seeks to define what is right and wrong. Life seeks to know him. One builds control, the other builds oneness. The more we live from the soul, the more complex life becomes. When we live from the spirit, simplicity returns. We stop asking, is this right or wrong? And begin to ask, is this you, Father? And so this is the exchange the cross brings. The Father is not training better decision makers. He is forming sons who live from his life. What once demanded effort now flows from his being. The striving of the soul is replaced by the rest of Holy Spirit. Watchman Nee wrote that the cross brings man back to life itself, ending the endless analysis of good and evil and restoring fellowship with him. Once his life rules within, peace replaces the strain and striving of self. The believer ceases to act for God and begins to live from him. The activity of the soul gives way to the movement of Holy Spirit. From here, the Father begins to show us how this breaking unfolds in daily life, the many ways he shapes his sons. And so it often comes through circumstances that reveal the self-life in ways we cannot control. Each situation becomes a mirror reflecting what still governs us inside. And often he works through relationships, using the people around us to expose what independence hides. Conflict and misunderstandings uncover motives, fears, and unhealed places where self still tries to rule. He also works through timing. Delays and closed doors are often his design to confront impatience and cultivate trust. Then there is loss. The Father removes what was built in the strength of self so that false foundations collapse and dependence on him is formed. Hiddenness becomes another instrument in his hand. He conceals us from view to purify motive, teaching us to live unseen and at rest in his approval alone. Silence carries its own purpose. When heaven seems quiet, we learn whether our ear was tuned to answers or to a relationship. Through correction, he speaks with precision, dividing between soul and spirit until self loses its voice. And all of these are expressions of his discipline, training, and ultimately expressions of his love, shaping sons who can carry his life without mixture. The breaking is an ongoing process for all of his sons maturing in his way of life. Here, the Father's eternal desire, sons living by the life of the Son, becomes a reality. Every loss has meaning, every exposure has purpose, every delay carries the wisdom of the Father's timing. He does not try to repair what was old, he reveals what is truly new and what is born of his life. And when we reach this point, we can no longer resist his hand. We recognize it as his love. His dealings no longer threaten our security, they reveal it. And the spirit within stands free, and the life of the Son flows without hindrance. And the breaking is accomplishing its purpose, the sons of God living by the life of another. So, part one showed us why the breaking is necessary, and part two has exposed the futility of self and the absolute necessity of the cross. And then what comes next becomes personal. And so, in the next part, I'm going to share some of my own story. For me, it wasn't only gradual dealings over time, it was a sudden crash that had been building for years. It was his way with me, and it changed everything. That moment began the process of stripping away everything I thought I was building for him, and it exposed just how entrenched I was in my own independence. And so the next part opens my story, the one I can only truly see now from the other side of it. It's taken years to understand what actually happened and why, to begin to understand his ways, because I now know what he has always wanted. And the breaking was not just a big single crash of a moment, but a steady, slow fire walk that has unfolded over the last 5 or so years and is still ongoing. So join me tomorrow, part 3 of The Breaking, where I share my own personal journey